Imagine an army of warrior monks, men who took vows of poverty, but who ironically became the owners of an incalculable fortune, holding castles, lands, and treasures that made the kings of Europe green with envy. They were the absolute elite of their time. But suddenly, these same untouchable heroes were hunted down, thrown into dark dungeons, tortured in inhuman ways, and burned alive at the stake. And in today's video, we're going to dive into the dark details that led to the tragic end of the Order of the Knights Templar. To understand how the Templars fell, we first need to understand the extent of the power they had achieved. The order was created at the beginning of the 12th century with a very clear goal: to protect Christian pilgrims traveling to Jerusalem and to defend the Holy Land from attacks by the infidels. They were monks, but they were also elite soldiers. They wore that famous white mantle with a red cross on the chest, which became one of the greatest symbols of the Middle Ages. During the Crusades, the Templars gained a legendary reputation for never fleeing the battlefield. In fact, their rule stated that a Templar could never retreat in the face of the enemy. Their courage was so great that princes, nobles, and ordinary people from all over Europe began donating land, castles, and a lot of money to the order as a way to support the war and, in their view, secure a place in heaven. Over time, the Templars became extremely wealthy. Just to give you an idea, records from the time state that they came to own 9,000 properties spread throughout Europe. They had farms, mills, churches, and entire villages working for them. They also received enormous privileges from the popes without having to pay taxes to anyone. No bishop or ordinary priest could excommunicate a Templar. They were not subject to the laws of the countries where they lived. They answered solely and exclusively to the Pope. Their power was so great that the Templar buildings in Paris and London became the largest and safest vaults in the world. Kings kept their crowns, their jewels, and their treasures inside the temples under the protection of these warrior monks. But everything that goes up must come down eventually. The major turning point leading to the Templars' downfall happened in the year 1291. It was in that year that the city of Acre, the last great Christian stronghold in the Holy Land, fell into the hands of Muslim armies. The battle was terrible and bloody. 300 Templars fought to the death defending the city, and the Grand Master at the time was killed in combat. Only a handful of knights managed to escape with the order's treasure on a ship to the island of Cyprus. With the total loss of the Holy Land, the Templars' great purpose in life disappeared. They no longer had pilgrims to protect in the east, nor any more holy wars to fight. Europe's enthusiasm for the Crusades had died out. So the Templars began to return to their wealthy estates in Europe. Imagine the situation. Now, Europe was full of thousands of professional warriors, extremely well trained, who formed a gigantic private army, incredibly wealthy, that paid no taxes and did not obey the local kings. They began to get involved in the internal politics of countries, interfering in disputes between nobles and even fighting against other Christians. Of course, this started to generate deep envy and hatred. The kings and nobles looked at the Templars and didn't agree that they should still have so many privileges and lands since they had failed to protect the Holy Land. King Edward I of England, for example, needing money to pay his soldiers, went to the temple in London and stole 10,000 pounds of silver. His son, King Edward II, later did the same thing and took 50,000 pounds from the treasury. In this way, the Templars' immunity was beginning to crumble. But the man who would truly orchestrate the destruction of the order was the King of France, known as Philip IV or Philip the Fair. Philip was an extremely ambitious king, and most importantly, he was completely bankrupt. He had spent fortunes on wars and was desperate for money. He had already imposed heavy taxes on the people, had already confiscated property from the Jews, but the money was never enough. And right there, in the heart of his kingdom, in Paris, was the European headquarters of the Templars, which was full of gold, silver, and property. Philip wanted that money, but he needed a reason to take it. After all, you can't just arrest the most famous monks in the world without a good excuse. For Philip's plan to work, he needed control of the church. After the previous pope died, Philip used all his power and intimidation to put a man he trusted in the highest position of the Catholic Church. This man became Pope Clement V. The new pope was so submissive to the King of France that he even moved the papal seat from Rome to France. Clement was basically a puppet in King Philip's hands. With the pope in his pocket, Philip started to act. In the year 1306, the Pope wrote a letter to Jacques de Molay, who was the Grand Master and highest leader of the Templars at the time. In the letter, the Pope asked Jacques to come to France urgently and in secret, saying he wanted to consult the Grand Master about a new crusade to try to reclaim Jerusalem. Jacques de Molay suspected nothing. At the beginning of 1307, he arrived in France accompanied by 60 of his best knights. He made the fatal mistake of bringing with him the great treasure of the order, which was in Cyprus, and depositing it in the Temple of Paris. King Philip welcomed Jacques with great honors, embraces, and fake smiles. But behind the scenes, the king's agents were already spreading terrible rumors through the streets. The king needed to destroy the reputation of the Templars. If he said they were thieves, nobody would care much. He needed to accuse them of the worst possible crime for that time, heresy. In other words, crimes against God. So the king's spies found the perfect tool. They took prisoners who were already sentenced to death for other crimes and promised to spare their lives and give them a lot of money if they made up terrible lies about the Templars. Based on these false testimonies, King Philip drafted secret documents and sent them to all the governors and commanders of France. The king accused the Templars of spitting on the cross during their secret initiation ceremonies. He also accused the knights of denying that Christ was the Son of God, and the accusations kept getting more and more absurd. It was all a big lie, invented to turn the warrior monks into monsters in the eyes of the people. With the secret orders delivered, the plan was set in motion on a date that would be forever marked in history. It was a Friday on October 13th, 1307. And it's because of this exact day that Friday the 13th is considered an unlucky day even today. In the dead of night, by surprise, the king's soldiers attacked all the Templar castles and houses simultaneously throughout France. Jacques de Molay and thousands of his soldiers were dragged from their beds and thrown into filthy dungeons. All the gold, silver, and treasures were immediately confiscated by King Philip's hands. From that moment on, one of the darkest chapters in history began. The Templars denied all the absurd accusations, saying they were devout Christians who would shed their blood for the gospel. But the truth didn't matter, and the king wanted confessions, so he ordered the Inquisition to use torture to obtain them. The knights were stretched on racks until their bones were dislocated. In just a few weeks, 36 Templars died at the hands of the torturers, never admitting guilt. Driven mad by unbearable pain, with their bodies broken and their minds destroyed by the terror of the stake, many Templars finally gave in. They began to tell the judges exactly what they wanted to hear. Many only said these things to make the pain stop, with the promise that they would be forgiven if they confessed. News of these arrests and shocking confessions swept across Europe. In England, the young King Edward II received the letters from France and thought it was madness. He wrote back saying that the Templars in England were good and pure men, respected by everyone. The English king even sent letters to the kings of Portugal and Spain, telling them not to believe those lies, that it was all just pure envy and greed on the part of the French king. But then, Pope Clement V stepped in. He sent an official decree, a papal bull, to the King of England. The Pope said that he himself at first had doubted, but that the King of France had presented irrefutable evidence and clear confessions. The Pope ordered, with all his divine authority, that England and all other countries arrest the Templars and confiscate their property. The King of England, whether out of respect for the Pope or because he also had his eye on the Knights' money, gave in. In January of the year 1308, all the Templars in England were also arrested by surprise. The Grand Master of England, William de la More, was locked up in the famous Tower of London, along with dozens of his brothers. The cattle, fields, and wealth of the Templars were seized by the English king. In England, however, the law did not allow the use of torture. So, for more than a year, the English Templars were questioned peacefully and without pain to force them to lie. And absolutely none of them confessed to any crime. They swore by their salvation that the stories about idols and spitting on the cross were pure inventions, and that the French brothers only confessed because they were tortured. The Pope's inquisitors were frustrated. They had no way to condemn the order if there were no confessions of guilt, so they started hunting for witnesses outside the order who would be willing to speak ill of the knights, but no testimony was enough to condemn the order. The Pope then wrote an angry letter to the King of England demanding that English law be ignored and that the prisoners be tortured immediately. The Pope threatened the king, saying that if he didn't use torture, he would be offending God. The English king, weak, finally authorized the use of torture. The London guards handed the Templars over to the executioners. They were thrown into dark pits, chained up, left to starve, and subjected to beatings. After suffering terrible abuse, some monks couldn't take it anymore. One of them confessed that he had been forced to deny Jesus with a sword at his neck. In this way, the judge's goal had been achieved. Meanwhile, back in France, something extraordinary was happening. Many Templar knights who had confessed to crimes under torture began to recover in prison. They realized that they had stained the honor of their religion to save their own skins. And then, in an act of extreme courage, hundreds of them began to withdraw their confessions. They sent messages to the judges stating that everything they had said was a lie, forced out of them through torture. They demanded to be heard and defended the complete innocence of the Order of the Templars. When King Philip heard about this rebellion, he was furious. If the Templars proved that the confessions had been obtained dishonestly, his plan to steal the treasure would fall apart. He needed to act with extreme cruelty to shut those men up and strike fear into the others. The king ordered the Archbishop of Sens to take charge of the case. The Archbishop, who was the king's lackey, held a summary and terrible trial. He declared that any Templar who had confessed to the crime and was now claiming to be innocent was a repeat heretic. In other words, someone who had been forgiven and was now lying again. The punishment for repeat heretics was only one: the stake. The next morning, on May 12, 1310, 54 Templar knights were dragged from their cells. They were taken to the outskirts of Paris. They were tied to wooden stakes driven into the ground, and surrounded by kindling and charcoal, the executioners lit their torches and approached them, offering one last chance. If they admitted to the crimes, their lives would be spared. None of them accepted the offer, and all remained loyal to their order. In the days that followed, many other Templars in the prisons of Paris abandoned their heroism and went back to confessing whatever crimes the judges wanted, terrified of the stake. By that point, there was almost nothing left of the order except sick and terrified men in the prisons. The final blow came at the Council of Vienne, convened by Pope Clement at the end of the year 1311. The intention was to officially abolish the Templars, but surprisingly, most of the bishops and church leaders present at the council said it would be unjust to end the order without giving them the right to a fair trial and an official defense. After all, the Templars had died fighting for the Holy Land for almost 200 years, but Pope Clement and King Philip were not interested in justice. 9 fugitive Templar knights had the courage to show up at the council, saying they represented thousands of others hiding in the forests, and asked to defend the honor of their mantle. The Pope, not a fear, simply ordered these knights to be arrested and locked away in dungeons to die there. Ignoring the advice of almost all the church's bishops, the Pope acted on his own. In March 1312, the Pope issued an official order dissolving and banning the Order of the Templars forever. From that moment on, anyone who wore the white mantle with the red cross would be excommunicated and treated as a criminal, without a real trial, based only on rumors, torture, and the pressures of a debt-ridden king. The most legendary military force in the world was wiped off the map. In England, the leader William de la Moor died in a cold dungeon in the Tower of London, swearing to the innocence of his knights until his last breath. Many other old warriors from England, who could barely stand because of the torture, were dragged to the cathedral doors, where they were forced to publicly confess that the rules of their order were wrong and to ask the church for forgiveness. But history still had one last tragic act in store, and it took place in Paris on March 18, 1313. Grand Master Jacques de Molay and 3 other high-ranking officials of the order had already been suffering in prisons in France for more than 5.5 years. They had already endured heavy torture sessions. King Philip and the Pope decided they wanted to put on a final spectacle for the people of Paris. They set up a large wooden stage right in front of the famous Notre Dame Cathedral. The plan was to bring the Grand Master onto the stage, in chains, and have him repeat out loud, in front of thousands of Parisians, all the confessions of crimes he had made years earlier to escape torture. The 4 knights, beaten down, thin, and broken by years in the dark, were placed on the stage. The bishop, under the king's orders, read the list of heresies to the crowd and then looked at Jacques de Molay and asked him to confirm everything. What happened next took everyone by surprise. The old and weary Jacques de Molay, finding one last reserve of energy and a warrior's honor, raised his arms, bound in chains, toward the sky, walked to the edge of the stage, and spoke with a voice that echoed throughout the square. He said that lying was a grave sin, both before God and before men. He said that the greatest crime he had ever committed in his life was being weak, and that he had confessed to those lies only out of fear of death and the agony of torture. The square was in shock, and the bishop, along with the guards, quickly interrupted Jacques de Molay and dragged him off the stage back to prison. When King Philip, who was not present in the square, received news of that act of pure defiance by the Grand Master, he exploded in uncontrollable fury. Right then and there, without asking the church for permission, and without summoning any judge, he ordered that Jacques de Molay and the other leader who had stood by his side be burned immediately. That same afternoon, at sunset, the king's men prepared small bonfires made of charcoal on the little island in the middle of the Seine River in Paris. Jacques de Molay, the last leader of the Order of the Templars, was tied up and burned at the stake. With the flames of that bonfire in Paris, the story of the Knights Templar came to its absolute end. Before being burned to death, it is said that Jacques de Molay cast a curse through the fire and smoke. He supposedly summoned Pope Clement and King Philip to meet him before the tribunal of God before the year was over. Just a month and a few days after Jacques de Molay was burned, Pope Clement suffered a severe attack of dysentery and died. His body was placed in a church, but the church caught fire during the night and the Pope's body was almost entirely consumed by the flames. Just a few months after that, King Philip was struck by an illness and also died before the year was over. All the men who were at the center of the conspiracy against the Templars met tragic ends and miserable deaths shortly after destroying the monks. The Templars' treasure and lands by order of the Pope, were supposed to be handed over to the Order of the Hospitallers, but the King of France and other European kings took advantage of the excuse of legal costs from the trial and confiscated huge amounts for themselves. In the end, the destruction of the Order of the Temple was one of the greatest conspiracies in medieval history, forever marking the end of an era. So if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and also subscribe to our channel. And I'll leave another video suggestion here on the side for you to watch. So I'll see you in the next video.